Hello, everyone. You've got me again. Hello. So we're about to start today's session, Lessons Learned in Cybersecurity, with Zach Schramm. We'll have some time at the end, once again, for a Q&A. If you are joining us virtually, please place your questions in the chat, and I'll read them to our presenter. If you are joining us in person, please line up to use the microphone. And now I'd like to introduce you today to Zach. Zach is currently a technical security consultant at Google Cloud Public Sector. His cybersecurity career has progressed from an internship at Deloitte to roles at Booz Allen Hamilton and Mandiant, where he advised a range of organizations, including federal agencies, the DoD, and Fortune 500 companies. With expertise in intelligence-led security validation and Google Cloud technologies, he now helps public sector clients implement secure cloud solutions. Zach holds a BA in Legal Studies and Criminal Justice from UW-Madison and certifications like the Google Cloud Professional Security Engineer and CompTIA CASP+. So without further ado, I'll turn the time over to Zach.
All right, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be back on campus. I graduated in the spring of 2020. Not a great time to graduate. 11 out of 10 do not recommend that. Had to heavily rely on my Marine Corps training, which was improvise, adapt, and overcome at the time, and was able to kickstart and take the momentum that I had from being an intern here on campus at Deloitte, which I'm incredibly thankful for, and jump into cybersecurity and make something of that career. So I got hired on at Booz Allen, working with the federal environment, public sector, advising in cybersecurity operations, rolled that into Mandiant, where I was doing a lot with intelligence-led validation, as was mentioned, and now I'm excited to be at Google Cloud. So definitely grateful for my opportunities and experiences here on campus, and it's a pleasure to be back with all of you. So that's a little bit about me. As I mentioned, yeah, I'm an alumni of the university, and I'm currently at Google. I like to sum up my job as bringing the best of Google to the government. So I work with higher education institutions with some pretty cool projects that they're a part of with research and development and how Google's cloud architecture can help support that, as well as public civilian side of the government. So research institutions like NIH, Bureau of Land Management, all that kind of stuff. And then also the military and defense space where I have experience as well. So today I'm going to share a couple lessons that I have learned along the way in my consulting time since I've left UW. And the first one that I want to share with everyone today is that cybersecurity is not just a tech issue. And you might be thinking, what is going on? This guy came to a tech conference and wants to talk about things that are not tech problems, right? But hang in there with me because in the time that I spent with consulting, I've seen that we need to take a more holistic approach to cybersecurity. And we need to think about it from just more than a technical perspective because while it is true that cybersecurity does secure very technical systems, oftentimes we need to think of it in a broader scope because some of the biggest weaknesses, and I'll get into this in a minute, are the human side of cybersecurity. So as leaders, how many people here know about John Maxwell, leadership author? Really? Okay, see heads nodding, right? Raise your hands, anyone? There we go. All right, that's better. So John Maxwell is known for one of his books that talks about what tools are in our toolbox, right? We need different tools to approach different types of situations because if we just walk around all day with a hammer in our toolbox and that's the only thing that we have, we're going to hit everything on the head as if it's a nail. And one day we're going to come across a screw, but that's not going to work so well if we try to hammer in a screw. I've seen it tried. One person somehow was a mechanical engineer, but he didn't get his degree here at UW in engineering, so maybe that was his first problem. That's why maybe he was trying to hammer in a screw. But it's all good, right? It's not always a one-size-fits-all solution. So as leaders, we need to think outside of our toolbox and add different tools that we're able to use. And the reason I bring this up and talk about a bigger approach to cybersecurity than just trying to solve things with more technology is what I led into in my last slide. There's a human side to security. And every year, Mandiant releases their M-Trends report, which is a combination of what we've seen from doing incident responses and working with organizations at their most crippling point with ransomware, to doing proactive consulting to try to fix broken processes or maybe train them up. And in this M-Trends report from 2023, there's a lot of things in there that talk about the technical side, right? We're seeing threat actors that are leveraging things like hypervisors and cloud management planes or living off the land. But there's also this human side to it, and things that require or have some sort of human characteristic of a vulnerability of us as people. Things like user susceptibility, social engineering. Anyone that's been paying attention to cybersecurity in the last year or two is probably familiar with a group known as Scattered Spider, who we track at Mandiant as 3944. They are marvelous experts at social engineering. I've listened and had the opportunity to hear some of the phishing calls or help desk calls that they try to pretend to be to lure people into sharing multi-factor authentication codes and stuff like that. And they are very believable. They sound normal. They're not, calling you from some random number. They're trying to do all the things right to make it look like they're coming from a location that you might trust. They're doing their due diligence to research and appear legitimate. Phishing is something that, as technology leaders, I'm sure we're all familiar with by this point, right? Where a very similar concept where we take an email or maybe some sort of message and we try to exploit that to get credentials or have someone send a payment that wasn't supposed to be sent to try to make money off of them, right? And again, a human element to that, and maybe just the weakness of us as humans of trying to trust and being intrinsically inclined to trust. And the last one is weak credential storage, because it's so easy to want to use that Post-it note to just put that password right there in the monitor at the bottom so that way we know where it is every time you want to use it, right? It's a human weakness of us wanting to make things easy because we don't want to have to click through 6 different screens to get to LastPass or whatever password manager maybe it is that you're using, because that takes too much time and that slows us down, right? It's so much easier to do that. So we have these technical problems, or they can lead to technical problems, but ultimately they're caused by weaknesses of us as humans. So how do we solve that, right? You say, okay, we have this issue, we've identified that we can take this bigger approach. And my pitch to that is finding people who come from non-technical backgrounds to help strengthen and bolster and diversify our cybersecurity teams. These are all examples of different roles that you can fulfill without maybe a super technical background and still be highly successful in cybersecurity. Things like training and education, which I hope doesn't go on deaf ears here at UW-Madison, right? As part of my job at at Mandiant, I've been part of our training and education team, which has been a super rewarding opportunity to take the knowledge that I have and share it with different groups. And every time I do that, I learn so much from the people that we're teaching, almost more than sometimes I'm teaching them, it seems like. So training and education is entirely an important aspect of that as well. We need lawyers and people who have legal backgrounds to help us with the ickiness and the messiness of governments and compliance, things like FedRAMP, getting an ATO for federal systems, making sure that we have accreditation, making sure that we're in compliance with maybe things like FERPA here on campus or HIPAA, if we're talking about SMPH and the School of Medicine, right? All different requirements that we have to think of. We also need our business school folks with their MBAs to come on in and help us identify what's costing us too much money. Where do we have redundancy in our environment? How can we make our processes more efficient? And how can we make our people, better trained? And then there's also other opportunities for things like security authorization analysts, where my career here at Deloitte started way back in 2016, and I'm aging myself now a little bit. Things have changed here in Madison a lot, it seems like. I haven't been back in a while, and suddenly Regent Street's grown six stories on every direction, right? Crazy. But security authorization, right? We need people to grant access to systems. So as we're doing that, very basic cybersecurity concept, right? The CIA triad. We want to make sure we have the confidentiality of our systems, that only the people who need access have access to it. Really important, but it's ultimately a business process that it's pretty easy to train people on. We can train them, use that training education to do the technical side, but they bring so many different skill sets. So this is where my personal narrative of this comes in, right? As mentioned in the beginning, I was a legal studies major while I was here at UW-Madison. And my sophomore year, I had the opportunity to take a class which was Comparative Literature 203 with Professor Grunewald, who's probably somewhere here on campus not too far from me with his ears ringing right now because I'm talking about him. But at the time, he hadn't written a book yet that I have up here on the screen, which ultimately talks about these narratives of guilt and innocence and how the literary themes and the way that a defense attorney tells a story can impact someone's outcome while they're on trial, whether they are found guilty or innocent. And I went to office hours a lot and got to know him pretty well and thought this was a really intriguing idea. But what I didn't know at the time was that this would have some parallels to my career a little bit later on. While I was at Booz Allen and I was working in the public sector space, I had the opportunity to start getting into cyber intelligence. And a lot of those same literary themes, the impacts on laws and outcome by the way that we tell a story, in this very clear, concise way of writing without bias, made me a really great cyber intelligence analyst, because when you write an intelligence product, it has to be written in a very clear, concise way. We can't put our own personal bias in that report, because it'll skew the way that people who are receiving and deciphering that intelligence will perceive it. So it needs to only state the facts that go along with it. So you can see here the comparison of some of these skill sets that we bring in from other backgrounds. We have a lot of students here on campus who like to work in these fields, just like myself once was one of those students. So, we have a lot of backgrounds to pull from. Myself and another one of the students that I worked with both went into cybersecurity and are still working. One of them just got hired at Microsoft, and I've been at Google now for a while. So these skill sets that we bring along help contribute. I've seen this a lot too with people who have transitioned from nursing or maybe even law enforcement into cybersecurity, because they understand the methodology, right? A nurse has to take in all the different information you tell them, right? I have these symptoms, these are the things that I'm feeling, I took this medication, but it didn't help, to help make a diagnosis and help solve your medical issue, right? Police officers who have investigative backgrounds are taking all different types of information and have to decipher it, so that way they're able to ultimately come up with pieces of evidence that can help them solve a crime and get to the root cause of what actually happened on a scene. So those skill sets are really helpful when we're talking about security analysts who are working in a SOC, taking in all those raw logs and trying to understand, siphon through all that noise and understand what was the root cause of that caused this alert to fire on that endpoint or that machine. The second lesson I want to share today is that cyber is better when we're working together. And some of this actually came from my experience here at UW, that very early on in my career, actually my last year here on campus, I had the opportunity to work on the cyber policy team. And this was a really unique experience, because here at UW Madison, a very polarizing shared governance model. Some people love it, some people hate it, right? But it allows key stakeholders to come together and have a stake in what's going on around campus and have their voice heard, so that way when these global policy decisions are made on campus, we understand the impact that it'll have at each college and division without just being tone deaf to the impact that our policy is going to have. So as I got to Google, Phil Venables, who is our cloud CISO, talks about this concept that he likes to think of with security that is built in from the beginning, not bolted on. So when I talked at an opportunity that I had a couple months ago with a client, they were like, oh, we have all this great technology, all this kind of stuff, but they weren't implementing it. They didn't really have any sort of a roadmap for how they were going to do it. So we talked about, how do we get the key stakeholders together to help work together and figure this out? Which brought us to some of the characteristics for success. So these are things like establishing clear goals and shared understanding. So I worked with a client earlier, about 2 years ago, and they had kind of the blank check. They had all the technology in the world. They had Splunk, they had all of the endpoint detection and response tools you could ever imagine. They had all this great stuff, right? Anyone who would love to get their hands on all of the cool technology in cybersecurity, this was the place you'd have wanted to be, right? Or at least the environment you wanted from a technical standpoint. However, they didn't have any leadership. They didn't have buy-in, they didn't have a clear mission, and they didn't know what they wanted to do really to actually defend their technology and their company from any cyber threats. And they got breached multiple times, which is why we got brought in to try to help this. So their organizational, management, because I wouldn't necessarily call them leadership, decided we're going to do this program, we're going to call it best in class. But there was nothing to measure what was best and what class they were actually supposedly competing with. So it made it really hard, because there was never really any organizational change, because the mid-level managers, as Laura talked about, getting that technology leadership, right? Those technical experts, those are the ones that are going to help drive this, because they're the resident experts. They're the ones working on these products and solutions day in and day out. And then you have your mid-level managers who may be helping with that. But they didn't have an idea of what they were doing. They were just, doing whack-a-mole and hoping that something would stick. They also didn't really have this culture of collaboration and trust, which is super important in an organization, because if you don't feel like you can take risks and make mistakes, you're not going to do the things that are innovative. You're not going to have meaningful change. You're not going to have meaningful impact if you're worried about it. So a lot of those mid-level managers were fighting each other for different management higher up opportunities. So it was a lot of fish in a small pond with small opportunities for growth. So they would backstab each other or their actual engineers if they make a mistake. So they weren't actually innovating or changing or growing because they didn't have the opportunity to do that. So it's important to make sure that we have that trust and collaboration. One of the cool things that I love working in public sector, at least with universities, is I see so much more appetite for experimentation within security. So using things like Elk Stack instead of Splunk or QRadar for a SIM, because you have the technical expertise to maintain Elk Stack and deploy it and fine tune it and go through your logs and all those kinds of things. And it's really cool to see some of the novel and outside of the box things that come from that. Another one that's really, really important is providing the role specific and training for and awareness. As I mentioned, I do a lot of this kind of thing with Mandiant in our Mandiant Academy, where I go out and teach network traffic analysis, or I go out and teach cyber risk for executives, where we bring in executives who maybe oversee teams that have a cyber component but don't necessarily understand all the technical details, or maybe don't need to understand those, but they at least need to understand what the capabilities of their team are. And every time I teach that course, they get so excited by the end of it because like, wow, I never knew that our team could do this, or wow, that really got me thinking that our team has so much more capability, or wow, I didn't know that that maybe they need a little bit more budget for some of these things and the actual value that they can provide to our organization. So making sure that we're training our people to become better in their role and have those opportunities to go to conferences, meet other people, find new ways to do things, all that kind of thing. And then also teaching the leaders so that way they understand the importance and the value that their people are bringing to the organization. Which gets to the last point that I have of celebrating success and recognizing those contributions. This is so important because you get people who make those big changes, or sounds like there's some really great initiatives going on here at UW with this Workday deployment, all those types of things. And as we get to those small wins along the way, it's important to celebrate those because that allows us to demonstrate that, hey, we're having impact here. What we are doing is leading to a bigger cause, having those clear goals and that shared understanding, and we are making impact because I was a cross-country runner when I was in high school, and if you always thought about finishing the race, you would never get to the end of the race because you were so worried that, oh, I have 2 miles left to go, right? You just need to run each mile at a time and be like, all right, I got through mile 1, that's great, now I'm gonna go have a really good mile 2. And take it each step of the way and celebrate those little successes along the way so that way your people feel like they've been recognized and have the opportunity to share the impact and their contributions to the organization. All right, that's what I have for us today. Do I have questions from anyone? I know we have some online folks as well.
Yes, we have 2 questions online.
All right.
The first, what is the stress level for this career? Is it more stressful when you start and gets less stressful as you progress? It seems that I would have a hard time going to sleep thinking about all of these security issues.
Absolutely. I think within security, there's more roles. Some roles that have more levels of stress, right? I would never want to be a CISO. I respect what they do, but it's a decent amount of pay for a lot of stress because when something happens and it all hits the fan, you're the guy they're going to be looking to, right? So I think that, there's a lot of stress in that. I know a handful of wonderful incident responders who I've worked with at Mandiant, but a lot of times they're flying on that crazy flight over to Singapore or over to Europe because the client had a breach and they need people on site because we don't have connectivity in their environment anymore because we had to contain it and shut it down. So at a moment's notice, they're getting on a plane and going. It's super fun to be part of the noise, be part of all that in the moment. But then when you're on week 2.5, 3, week 4, where you've been working every day nonstop to contain and eradicate in this crazy environment with ransomware, it can start to wear on you. So, I've been part of SANS conferences and spoke at one last spring where we talked about that and the risk of burnout in cybersecurity, keeping yourself fresh, having time to develop yourself and maybe take a little bit of a step back, balance that 60-40, right? Where 60% of it is work, maybe 40% of it is learning. Take a week or 2, focus on learning maybe not so much on the stressful aspect of logs and security analysis or managerial stuff. Focus on the learning, the development, maybe something that you enjoy from a personal development standpoint, so that way you don't burn yourself out.
Thank you. And the next question, really curious to know how the leak of Vault 7 CIA hacking tools affected the security industry.
Yeah, definitely a big one, right? It's hard because once you take a cat out of the bag, you can't put it back in. So, once tools that have been, novelly deployed or developed for specific use cases get out, that can continue to be evolved and utilized for nefarious purposes. We saw this with several variants of malware and ransomware that have hit over the last 10 or 15 years, where maybe they were part of nation state tools that got leaked, by activists and all that kind of stuff. And if it's something that we don't know about yet, that's called a 0-day. So it exploits those 0 days or things that we're not aware of that might be vulnerabilities or weaknesses. And then we have to play catch up to try to contain and make sure that we get those devices secured again. So definitely has a huge impact on the security industry, and it's something that we always are monitoring and vigilant for.
Questions in the room?
Yeah.
Hey, Zach, good to see you on campus again.
Absolutely, thanks.
So coming from a background where you're working in a consulting environment, especially a firm like Booz Allen Hamilton, a lot of organizations, will hire a consultant and they like to listen to the consultant about, advice that you have for, hey, here's what your security team can do. They're like, wow, I never knew that. When the security team might be saying, gosh, I wish that my management would listen to me. So, as an external advisor, what advice do you have for IT or organizational leadership, with respect to kind of taking that internal feedback from their own teams?
Absolutely. I think it's important to stay true to what your mission is and who you are as an organization. And some organizations know that and are better than that than others, right? Like we've heard people like Simon Sinek say, know what you do, but also why you do it. So I think that those organizations are really well founded in their ability to understand what they're doing, take that advice, and provide that uplift from the external consultants. Some of those other organizations that maybe don't have that rely more on those consultants to help drive what that is. And maybe it's a little bit different. It might be a little uncomfortable for them because they're not used to having that strong notion of that guiding North Star of here's what we're doing, here's the mission, and here's why we're doing it. So I think that those organizations are a little bit more susceptible to that. And maybe not that it's necessarily always a bad thing, because it's important to have external checks and balances and understanding of, hey, here's what we're doing. What are we doing to continue to grow as an organization, continue to develop. And sometimes we need that external voice telling us what those things are that we need to do, and maybe pointing out those things that from a outsider perspective that we would not necessarily recognize, being part of it every day. Thanks.
Hi, Philip Dahl. Question for you. You mentioned time in the Marine Corps, I believe. Can you tell us a little bit about some specific Marine Corps skills or things you learned there that you really carried over into your career that really helped you specifically in this high-stress cybersecurity career?
Absolutely. A couple things. One, like I mentioned, improvise, adapt, and overcome. Things won't always be perfect in security, but you need to make sure that you're resilient. You can't get too focused on or hung up on one thing. You need to continue forward to what that actual big picture goal is and how that relates to it. The other one that I think is really, really important is the ability to cross-train and know what each other is doing. Something that we teach in the Marine Corps, I was an infantryman, is we're part of a team, a fire squad, right? 4 or 5 guys. And that if one of us goes down for whatever reason, we need to be able to take that person's job and fulfill those duties, so that way we're still a strong and resilient team. So in cybersecurity, that's really important that, I'm not asking everyone to go be a cyber lawyer, right, and have deep, years of cyber expertise in law and policy, right, but at least understand enough of what that component is, and cross-train within that, or maybe not go be a super technical, cloud resident expert on how to deploy secure GPC or Google Cloud VPC, right, virtual containers, so that way they're segregated environments, but at least understand that, hey, we need to have some compliance, and we maybe shouldn't just put all of this in a flat network kind of thing, right? So I think those are definitely 2 main ones that stick out for me from that experience. Thank you. That was a great question.
Any other questions in the room?
All right. Well, thanks, everyone. I appreciate it.